Oh, the whole thing?
Well, is this what you were just saying about the rabbi's story?
Yeah, I was a professor at a Hebrew university teaching about the Old Testament, the Torah. And he said if you're reading it literally, you're missing over a third of its beauty.
And in fact, they say there are 7 layers
Yeah.
of every scripture. 7 layers.
7 interpretations.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Uh-huh.
He said, why is the snake being punished by crawling on the ground when that's what he already did? He made a few comments. It just...
It had to mean something else. Symbolism, whatever.
Right,
Yeah.
right,
Okay.
exactly. Well, that's what we're talking about, is why we probably shouldn't be reading Bible literally. The things that we have always believed as doctrine have rooted themselves into our way of lives. With tradition and culture. In fact, they may mean something entirely different than we have always believed. Some of these things that become traditional to us, we may have actually overlooked truth by taking things a little too literally. All these things spoke Jesus to the multitude in the parables, and he did not speak without a parable. All of Jesus' words were symbolic, and there was nothing to be taken literally. Who also made us able ministers of the new covenant, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. Now, be not ministers of the letter seems to me not to take the Scripture literally. Here you are being told, as clearly as possible, that you should not take the Scripture literally. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. Well, we have 2 key words here, parable and dark. In other words, the Bible is telling us that you must begin to understand not with the brain, but with the heart, or the spirit. Dark sayings of old are simply words that have another meaning other than the literal. To understand a proverb and the interpretation of the words of the wise and their dark sayings. The text was written thousands of years ago, and they were talking about dark sayings of old. The Scripture leads off by defining the word wisdom. Then it shows wisdom is understanding, symbolic writings. Again, a reference to dark sayings, which means texts containing meanings more than just the literal. At no place in its more than 30,000 verses does the Bible claim that it is factually accurate in terms of history, science, geography, and all other matters. Inerrant itself is not a word found in the Bible or even known to Christian theologians, for most of history. Rather, the word was coined in the middle of the 19th century as a defensive countermeasure. Oddly enough, the doctrine of inerrancy is only about a century and a half old. Not only did many of the Christian church's brightest theologians not subscribe to anything like inerrancy, but many also oppose such a notion. For instance, St. Augustine, rarely described as liberal, lived for many years the margins of the church. A problem for him was the notion that Christians took literally stories like that of Jonah's spending 3 days in the belly of a whale. It was not until Ambrose, Bishop of Milan, introduced Augustine to allegorical interpretation, that is, stories that can point metaphorically to spiritual realities rather than historical facts, that Augustine could take the Bible and those who read it seriously. Earlier Christians, along with almost everyone else who lived prior to the last few generations, simply didn't imagine that for something to be true, it had to be factually accurate. This was a concern only advanced after the Enlightenment. Hence, 4 Gospels that diverged at 4 points, far from troubling earlier Christians, was instead seen as a faithful and fitting recognition that God's truth as revealed in Jesus was too large to be contained by one particular perspective. Frankly, reducing your understanding of truth only limits the power of Scripture. Read the Bible, even for a little while, and you'll soon realize that most of the major characters are, shall we say, less than ideal. Abraham passes his wife off as his sister twice in order to save his skin. Moses is a murderer. David sleeps around. Peter denies Jesus 3 times. Whatever their accomplishments, most of the heroes of the faith are complicated people, to say the least. Rather than imagine that the Bible was also written by ordinary, fallible people, inerrantists have made the Bible an otherworldly supernatural document that runs contrary to the biblical affirmation that God chooses ordinary vessels, jars of clay the Apostle Paul calls them, to bear an extraordinary message. In fact, literalists unwittingly ascribe to the Bible the status of being fully human and fully divine. That is normally reserved only for Jesus. And at last, as Karl Barth, one of the 20th century's greatest theologians, once said, I take the Bible too seriously to read it literally.